The UK Medical Freedom Alliance is the UK's most recognised and respected organisation campaigning for your right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice, and supporting doctors to uphold these rights. We are the UK's voice of ethical medicine. Please visit our website at ukmedfreedom.org, where you will find full details of our open letters, our podcasts, campaigns, information and template letters. Please sign up to receive our newsletter and be notified of our new campaigns, open letters and calls to action and any other important updates. Watch out for us in the media as we make our presence felt in the mainstream media and other places, especially alternative media, and also on our own podcast. So while speaking of social media, remember you can find us on Facebook and Telegram, X, formerly Twitter. From an audio perspective, you'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favourite podcasting platform. And finally, on video, loud and proud on YouTube. But in particular, please go to our Rumble channel, which is the platform for free speech. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you go. And finally, on our website, you will be able to donate to us via donor box or buy me a coffee. Anything you can will help us greatly continue with this platform and our services. And with that, thank you very much. And now on with the podcast. Well, welcome to the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, and our podcast today is going to be a really good one because I'm very, very happy to be joined by Dr. Tina Peers. And I think what we'll do just very quickly is look at some of her background. So she qualified in 1996 as a consultant in contraception and reproductive health, and in 2017 she was recognised as a menopause specialist by the British Menopause Society. Dr. Peers has been working since 2015 at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, which is the country's leading NHS menopause clinic, under the mentorship of leading consultant gynaecologist Mr. Nick Panay. She also works in his clinic in Harley Street, and she's a member of the British Menopause Society and the Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Health Care under the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists. You can find her www.menopauseconsultancy.co.uk and on Facebook and Instagram at Menopause Consultancy. Tina, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Ian, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
It's a real honour for us. And as you know, we are pushing forwards a lot of our various campaigns and trying to get the country to understand that the ethical medicine has been lost over the last few years, and that we're trying to get that back, and we're trying to give patients and in particular doctors a way back into seeing that ethics need to be followed much more closely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you're doing some fantastic work. I love your website. I mean, the information you've got on there is incredible.
Well, it's very kind of you. Thank you. And that's one of the things we're working on this year actually is to give that a nice, refreshed new look. So hopefully we'll get more visitors, and the more people will be downloading that information and using it. So we've got template letters and open letters, and yeah, it's great. It's a great resource.
Absolutely.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit, just quickly, your initial background, how you got into medicine in the first place, and what you've been doing for the last couple of years or so.
How long have you got?
Well, yeah.
I actually decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was 13. And we didn't have any medical people in our family, but I just loved human biology. And I knew I didn't want to sit in an office, although now I spend my time sitting at my computer most of the time. Yeah. But I wanted to do something that would be deal with people and help them. And I couldn't think of anything nicer to do than to study medicine. And I went to Guy's Hospital Medical School, and I qualified in 1983. So I've been qualified over 40 years. And I initially thought I wanted to be a GP. So I trained as a GP, and I did general practice for 7 years. And to be honest with you, I found it very stressful, and I found it very dissatisfying because I was told initially I had 10 minutes per patient. And I just couldn't do it in 10 minutes. I couldn't build a relationship with them, find out, what makes them tick, what their worries are, what their past history was, everything in 10 minutes, and do some proper sort of therapy treatment. And so that I was always running late, and it was stressful. And although the patients didn't mind, because they knew that when they came in, they would get their half an hour, 20 minutes or whatever. But it was just not working for me. And I also felt that I was sort of just doling out drugs and treating symptoms, and very seldom treating the actual cause of the symptoms, and that wasn't very satisfactory. So I did it for 7 years whilst I had my 3 children. And then I was also doing some contraception, and I just loved that. I found that not very stressful at all, and it was good fun, and the women were lovely, and the staff were great, and it was just really good. So in 1994, they asked me if I would run the contraceptive services for East Surrey, and it took me a nanosecond to decide that I would give up general practice and I would concentrate on sexual health. So I started doing that in 1994, and then in 1996 I became a consultant in contraception, and in 2002 they asked me to run Mid Surrey as well, so I took on that. Then in 2005 they asked me to lead for the whole of Surrey, so I did that. And in 2012 they added GUM and HIV, which are not my specialties, but we became a team, which was lovely. And I did that until 2017. And I also, all that time, was developing a private practice in which I was seeing women for menopause and contraception, etc. And that was great. And then I don't work at the Chelsea Westminster anymore, because unfortunately when the lockdowns came, they closed the clinic, and initially we were doing it online, which was great and worked very well, and then suddenly they said we're not going to do it anymore, even online, and on the telephone. And it was like, why? It was working. And we, at that clinic we would get all the sort of complex cases, and women would have waited sometimes 18 months to come and see us, and they were just going to discharge everybody and tell them they had to be resubmitted, re-referred to the clinic in the future when the clinic opened. And it just seemed ludicrous. I didn't quite know what was going on then. And since that closure of the clinic, they never invited the extra pairs of hands back, and I was one of those. So they now work on the sort of basic smaller staff. So I don't work for the NHS anymore at all, and I think that's been a huge advantage during the this COVID episode.
So how do you get your patients referred to now then? I mean, do GPs still refer patients to you, or do they come direct?
Yeah, so my private practice consists of a couple of things. I see predominantly menopausal women, not women for contraception anymore. So that's my sort of female side of things. But in 2016, my daughter became super ill, and I became very interested. I had to diagnose her because no one seemed to know what was going on, and she had mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance. So I made the diagnosis, and then I started to get very interested in that condition, obviously, because it was close to home. And then I started accidentally diagnosing 4 or 5 people a week with the condition. When I was just asking them, I was working in contraception at that time, and I'd be asking them their history, and they'd tell me their history, and I go, I think I know what you might have. And people would burst into tears because they would be so relieved that somebody was interested and that somebody had some answers for them. And some of these patients had been ill for decades with no answers and no help. And then I would just give them a few basic bits of advice and say, well, try this and try this and try this. And they'd come back and they'd say, I feel so much better. I feel so much better. So it was really exciting at that stage to develop a new interest and a new sort of specialism, if you like. And so then patients just find me. So I think they talk on Facebook or something, but they would find their way to my clinic and say, I'm a mast cell activate. I think I might have histamine intolerance. Can you help me? So now I see women for menopause, of course, some of whom have got mast cell activation, and they're the more complex HRT cases generally. And then I see lots of people for MCAS. And then along came COVID. And that was an interesting time because I wasn't actually in the NHS particularly then. And I think that allowed me to avoid the groupthink and to think critically myself, which I'd always been recommended to do throughout my whole career. Was, think for yourself, use your clinical acumen, your experience, your knowledge.
So what were your initial thoughts at that time then? When it first hit?
My initial thoughts were, my family and friends were saying to me, what should we do? What should we do? What's going to happen? And I was saying, look, we keep calm. We don't know how bad this is going to be. We don't know anything about the infection at the moment. But the principles are that you see, first of all, what symptoms present, how we can treat them, because you treat everything as soon as you can. You don't leave things until they're worse. You always treat early. You also, so you treat early. You also see which groups of the population are going to be vulnerable to it, because it's not going to be the same for all ages. And it's usually the elderly who have comorbidities who are most at risk and the most vulnerable. And I said, we'll look at how we can help them and protect them, and boost. In the meantime, we all need to boost our health. We need to take vitamin D and exercise and lose weight and stay healthy and eat good food and all the rest of it. And I said, there's a lot we can do, and then we will see what happens. But there should be no need for our lives to be really affected detrimentally. People should be able to carry on their normal business, children should be able to go to school, etc. And then, of course, as the information came through, it became obvious that it really was very mild and insignificant in children, and that they would then start getting herd immunity, which would be good for the whole population, and so on. And then I started hearing things coming out of the authorities that just didn't make sense. And it was like, hang on a minute, that isn't really where I'm coming from at all, and I'm basing it on evidence-based scientific sort of background, and why are they telling everyone to stay home? When they started talking about asymptomatic spread, I was thinking that's a nonsense. How can you have an airborne disease that's spread with people who haven't got any symptoms, and telling people to stay home for 2 weeks after they had a positive test. And I started thinking, well, how can we be so specific and test for this virus unless you test antibodies? You can't test with so then I realized the PCR test wasn't COVID specific, and it wasn't, and it was set to be 45 cycles in the laboratories, which gives an over 90% false positive rate. And I just started to really smell a rat and thought, what is going on here? It felt very, very strange.
Did you have colleagues at that time as well that were sort of supporting what you were thinking too?
Not really, because I really worked on my own, and so I didn't come across that many colleagues. Okay. And they started saying, do everything on telemedicine and don't see people in the flesh, and so I didn't really come across many colleagues to talk to about this. But I kept thinking, am I going mad? This is just so bizarre. Everything is just so bizarre. And then when they started saying they were going to vaccinate people, I was like, hang on, we don't vaccinate against cold, the coronavirus that causes a cold, because we can't catch up with it. Right. And it's constantly mutating and changing. So how on earth are we going to stand a chance to do that with this? And it just made no sense whatsoever. And the more they talked about it, the less they talked about herd immunity. Do you remember they used to talk about herd immunity and these P numbers and things? And suddenly on the news they weren't talking about that, and they're just talking about vaccination. And I thought, well, maybe for the elderly that might be good, the most vulnerable people. And then the other thing was, I said to my family, don't worry, what we'll need to do is open the GP surgeries longer, because they'll still need to see all the people they currently see, plus there'll be all these extra people worried about COVID, and so they need to be open longer. And then the government said, we're going to close the GP surgeries, and I was like, what? This is just like, oh my God, I really felt like I was living in La La Land. Yeah. Well, I still feel like I'm living in La La Land.
Well, I don't think I think there's a lot more to come yet, I think.
I think so. And I was just like completely flummoxed by it. And you see, for my whole life, I had believed in things. I believed in that the goodness in people would be what would drive them to be in public office.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in the main, I knew there weren't always good people everywhere, but I thought in the main, people would do the right thing. And that I was gobsmacked when I found that, you know, people who we had elected and were supposed to look after us and have our best interests at heart obviously didn't. And then when there was no discussion, that was really weird. You know, no scientific debate. No,
No, it's crazy, isn't it? And I was a police officer for 10 years, then a corporate investigator for another 10.
Yes.
And even me, an old cynic, even I got caught out, you know, at literally the very early days. And I thought of myself as being fairly awake about most things, but that one caught me out because there was no information, so we didn't know what we were dealing with. So I ended up, you know, I was one of those. I think I did wash down my first delivery of shopping, maybe the first one. You know, then I looked in the mirror and gave myself a slap and said, "What on earth are you doing, Ian? You know, wake up. This is not right." You know.
Well, Ian, honestly, you were more awake than me then, because I believed I'd been taught at medical school that the MHRA, for example, were extremely strict. And they wouldn't let a drug in unless it was absolutely proven to be safe, and et cetera, et cetera. And how wrong was I?
Yeah.
You know, how wrong was that assumption or teaching and indoctrination? It just came as a huge shock.
Yeah,
actually.
No, I think it came as a big shock to everybody, and I think there's shock still to come for a lot of people, because there are so many that are still under the impression that the government and these organisations are doing the right thing for them, and that the World Health Organisation is the be all and end all, and that they're going to look after us, you know, for the rest of time. And clearly, it's not that at all. And you only got to look at how these organisations are financed to see where things are going wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so
right. Just follow the money.
Right. Yeah. It's a well-worn phrase now, but it's very true. As soon as you look into it, you can see almost what decisions they're going to make, because, you know, he who pays the piper, as they say, calls the tune, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And things like, you know, our chief medical officers, of which there were 4, I think they've all got positions in pharma companies now.
Right.
They've been rewarded for their conduct.
Yes.
And their conduct was appalling.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely appalling. In the spring of 2020, there were reports coming out of Italy of postmortem findings from people who had died from COVID. And I remember at that point, you see, I was reading everything I could read, everything I could find, because I wanted to understand this virus, understand how to treat it, see what was going to happen, to help my patients, help my family, help my neighbours. And this report came out, and it said they looked at the lung tissue, and that they were slightly confused by what they found. They said they found lots of inflammation. They found some hemorrhaging. They found some blood clots as well. And they found membranes being broken down and just disintegrating. And when I read that, I thought, well, that sounds exactly to me like what happens when there's a cytokine storm. And the mast cells release elastase, which breaks down membranes. It releases heparin, which causes bleeding. It releases other cytokines that cause clotting, and it also causes massive inflammation from the histamine release. And that was the sphere in which I was sort of working. So I thought, wow, this is very interesting. I think that these patients are not dying from COVID. They're dying from their body's reaction to it, and their bodies have overreacted to it. And therefore, if that's the case, then we should be able to treat COVID with some very simple things that everyone can buy over the counter to reduce all of that inflammatory response. So because, you know, people around me were catching COVID, and sometimes patients were catching COVID, they would contact me and say, what do you think I should do? And I would say, well, I think you need to take vitamin D and vitamin C and magnesium and selenium and zinc and quercetin, which is a mast cell stabilizer. All of those things can be bought over the counter. I think you've probably got some antihistamines in the house. Please start taking those. But if it's loratadine or cetirizine, whatever, 10 milligrams, it'll say on the box, you know, once a day, but please take it 4 times a day whilst you've got the infection, and keep off the high histamine things like tea and coffee, and avocados and spinach and tomatoes and bananas and things. And then let me know how you're getting on, ring me tomorrow, let me know how you're doing. And people started ringing me and saying, "I'm so much better." 24 to 48 hours, and they were up, getting dressed, having showers, getting on with their lives, and were better. And so that became my sort of standard advice. Now, I'd also said to my family in the beginning, "Oh, don't worry, we'll work out how to treat this. And then public health will do some campaigns and they'll tell everybody, take vitamin D and get healthy and lose some weight." And, and once we've worked out how to treat it, I thought they would put campaigns out there to tell everyone, go and buy antihistamines, have them in the cupboard, get yourself on vitamin D, very basic thing. Something like 56% of the people who were under the age of 80 who died from COVID were deficient in vitamin D. So very simple, tell everyone to have vitamin D, and you hopefully reduce some of that morbidity, mortality, and but nothing came out.
It's amazing because you said that's sensible public health information, isn't it? They should be, they should have been making short videos detailing all of these interventions that you could take, which we know are safe already, and have known for donkey's years that they're safe. So,
Absolutely.
Why not take this stuff and give yourself a better chance?
Absolutely. And some of the people who asked me for advice had been really quite ill. So my daughter's best friend rang up in absolute floods of tears, and she said, "I'm going to become an orphan. Both of my parents in their 60s have got COVID." And this was in the Wuhan, the worst bit, the first bit. And her father was an alcoholic and a chain smoker all his life, and had also already had 2 stents put in. And he was really, really unwell with it. And she said, "The GP won't come out. He won't come and see him. And he's too ill to go anywhere, but we don't want him to go to hospital." And, anyway, I said, "Right, don't panic. Go and get this stuff. Give it to both of them. This is what I want you to do. And let me know how they are tomorrow." Because I was thinking, well, I might be able to give some steroids if necessary, because prednisolone is a very good short, sharp treatment that reduces inflammation rapidly. And Dr. Shankara Chetty came to the same conclusions I did, and he's treated over 14,000 patients. I mean, I've only treated about 100. He's treated over 14,000, and he hasn't had anyone need oxygen or go to hospital or die. So he's got a mortality rate of 0, an infection fatality rate of 0 with his treatment. And anyway, so I'd said to her, "Ring me tomorrow." And she rang me the next day. She said, "I can't believe it." She said, as soon as we started giving him the stuff, he stopped coughing, and he's up and about today, and they're fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, good, great. That's good. So,
And then those stories started to come out from the States, from the likes of Pierre Corey and his going to the Senate and saying, "Look, I'm saving people, and in Mexico we're saving people. We're using ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and we're getting all these results," and they still ignored it and still stopped people using it.
It's extraordinary, because I was treating them without even those drugs, and they were responding incredibly well, and just clearing up very quickly, getting better. And in September, on the 10th of September 2020, some other colleagues in America who also treat mast cell activation and are much, much more knowledgeable and more experienced than I am, they had written a paper which was published in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, and it was Dr. Lawrence Safran, Weinstock and Molderings. And in that paper, they said the hyperinflammation of COVID could be related to mast cell activation. And their hypothesis was that about 17-20% of patients who got COVID had a tricky time with it. For most people, it was a bit like flu, and they got better, and it wasn't very nice. But when you're ill, you stay home. You don't go and infect everybody around you. You're too ill to. If you have flu, if you've ever had flu, I've had flu twice in my life. Yeah, there was no way you could leave the house. So you stay at home and you keep your germs to yourself, and you get better. But they said about 20% of patients seem to be having more difficulty with COVID and needing to be hospitalized or whatever. And it's about 17 to 20% of the population who have had mast cell activation syndrome. So they were saying, just like I had thought in the spring of 2020, they'd written a paper about this hypothesis, and they thought exactly the same thing and had it published in September.
How does that present itself, that syndrome?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a congenital abnormality of the mast cells, which are part of our immune system, and they become overreactive. So things that the body should just ignore, it reacts to as if it's an infection or it's being attacked. And the mast cells are just lining everywhere. So they're under the skin, they're lining the sinus, the mucous membranes in the nose, nasal passages, sinuses, the throat, the gut, the whole of the gut, the cornea, and they're ready to recognize any invaders and to defend us. But when your mast cells are a bit overvigilant, they react to things they should just ignore, like chemicals, perfumes, stress, etc. And then they release the cytokines. They release over 1,000 different chemicals, many in tiny, tiny amounts, which aren't really measurable in normal laboratories, but they're very potent, and they cause inflammation. And one of the biggest things they release is histamine. And we don't even know what some of those cytokines do, but we do know what histamine does and what some of them do. And histamine causes inflammation, and it causes redness and itching and etc. And so if you're getting this inflammation in your gut, you get IBS symptoms. If you get them in your muscles, you get fibromyalgia and muscle aches and pains. If you get them in your head and you get vasodilatation, you're going to get migraine and headaches. You can, if it's under your skin, you're going to get maybe urticaria or rosacea or psoriasis or eczema. So it expresses itself in all of these conditions. So these patients present POTS. A lot of them get POTS. It's associated very much with POTS, where they have low blood pressure and feel dizzy when they stand up and get tachycardia where their heart rate goes up. And so there's all these sort of dysautonomia type symptoms. And so when patients say, I've got IBS, we can usually, or whatever, fibromyalgia or rosacea, I can say, I think I know how we can improve that for you. And it works. Right.
So if they've had COVID, then I guess then they would have inflamed in the nostrils and in the
lungs.
And
absolutely.
So there you have your symptoms right there.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the patients with long COVID, which is really post-viral syndrome, like ME, they started reporting their symptoms in the sort of spring summer of 2020. And I was contacted by a BBC journalist who said, I heard you talking on some podcast and talking about mast cell activation and histamine intolerance. And actually she said, I think I've got long COVID and I think I've got the symptoms you're talking about. And I said, well, that's very interesting because I don't go on Facebook. And she said, all the Facebook groups are talking all about, what their symptoms are. And I said, can you send me some of those symptoms, the lists? I'd like to see, are they MCAS? They could be MCAS. And that's when I became aware of this group, really, the long COVID sufferers. I wasn't surprised by it because of, that's what we see post-virally, people's who have got MCAS. They get the inflammation grumbles on and on and on and on and on, and so they don't sort of get over the acute infection so well. And so in the August, I asked if I could go on to the BBC News, and finally in October they let me go on for 2 minutes. It was BBC Look East, and I said, please could people with long COVID just download this free app. It's called the People With app. It's really good. And you put in your symptoms and then I can have a look at it and see if the profiles look similar. And 2,200 people downloaded the app within 48 hours. I mean, it was amazing.
Effective.
And and it was great. And their symptoms were exactly like the patients I was used to seeing. So I thought, I think they've got MCAS, these patients, so the patients who catch COVID, get over it and get on with their lives haven't got this this propensity. And I also was thinking, I wonder if COVID actually either just exacerbates it or it actually causes it. So the only way to find out would be to talk to people who've got it. And I felt morally obliged as well as intrigued. to open a clinic. So on the 1st of November, I opened a long COVID clinic, and I put it half day a week in my diary because that's all the time I had. And it was fully booked to the end of March within 36 hours.
Wow.
Which was, and I hadn't advertised it. I mean, I must have just mentioned it to somebody that I should open a clinic. that was that, you know. So it showed the need, and it showed that these poor patients were actually not being helped by the NHS, which was no great surprise. And I started seeing them and realizing they were patients I could help, and that I would say 99% of them had previously undiagnosed and untreated mast cell activation.
You say you weren't surprised that the NHS weren't helping them, but I mean that's a bit of an indictment. But and I think I've got to agree with it just from my own personal experience. But why didn't the powers that be know this stuff? Because we've got chief medical officers that apparently have got all this experience, and that's why they're there. We've got a World Health Organization that's supposed to be packed full of experts on a global basis that should know this. Why wasn't that stuff being made public?
I don't know. You can theorize about why.
Yeah.
You can certainly have a pretty good idea of what's going on. But I mean, I wasn't surprised that the GPs and doctors weren't particularly, couldn't help patients with long COVID, because most of the doctors don't seem to know about mast cell activation syndrome. And in many ways, that's not their fault. The condition as a syndrome was pulled together in the 1980s, and it was given a name in the mid-90s. And in 2007, that was the first time that 3 case studies were actually published in one of the journals. So it's not taught in medical school. And I remember at medical school, we had an hour on allergies in the whole curriculum, and about 10 minutes of that was on mastocytosis. And they said, mastocytosis is so rare, you're never going to see it in your whole career. And so as a medical student, you think, okay, I don't need to think about that then. Because you're packing so much information into your brain. If you don't have to think about something, then you just let it go. And but actually, at that stage, of course, they didn't know about mast cell activation syndrome, which is similar to mastocytosis, but isn't as, in many ways, quite as bad. But the treatments are the same.
Right.
So people haven't been taught about this. And then when ME came along, do you remember people used to say, oh, it's all in their minds, and they're just, malingering and everything. And these poor people weren't at all. It was an absolute, it's just because the doctors didn't know how to put it together and piece it together and do something about it and didn't understand it, doesn't mean that the poor patients were malingering. No. So the poor ME patients have been given a very rough deal for decades. And it's only really in the sort of from, say, 2012 kind of time that more and more physicians, naturopaths, functional medicine doctors, especially in the States, have been really interested and picking up on MCAS as a condition and treating it and learning about treating it. There's been very little research. We need much more research into it. But there are lots of papers that have been written on it now, which is great. But most doctors, it's not ever been on there. It's not something that's ever been brought to their attention. So, and it's not helped by some immunologists poo-pooing it and saying it doesn't exist. And my question to them is, if it doesn't exist, what's your explanation for what's going on in these patients, and how come they respond well to the treatment?
Yeah.
If we're barking up the wrong tree, why are so many people getting better?
Yeah, I knew someone with ME, and it was terrible. They ended up being bedridden. They literally couldn't get out of bed. They had to be looked after because they couldn't get up the stairs on their own. They couldn't hardly move. Yeah. No,
terrible. So, I mean, I suppose the one good thing about long COVID is it sort of put ME on the map, and more NHS clinics are now talking about MCAS. More consultants are talking about MCAS. So it really has sort of. I was speaking in a complete vacuum pre-2020, and when I would write to GPs and things, sometimes the patients would tell me that the GP's eyes would roll up to the heavens when they read my letter, which is really rude and disrespectful and disappointing, because actually I was trying to help them help their patients. And 17% of their patients will be coming with these problems that they won't be able to help. But they can help if they knew about it, you know. So 80% of patients with MCAS are female, 80% have hypermobility, and 30% get interstitial cystitis, which is constant sort of low-grade infections in their bladder, irritation of the bladder.
Interesting.
So it's a very interesting syndrome. And once you get your head around it, it's really very satisfying to treat.
Wonderful. And when it comes to treatments, I understand you're the first to put yourself forward for experimental treatments upon yourself, whether it be plugging yourself into something electrical or taking something or applying it to your skin. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit like that and some of the most the more recent fun things you've tried and how you're getting on with those.
Well, I came across the ARC little device, which is a microcurrent device, and that is superb, absolutely superb. And it gives you a microcurrent, and it promotes your homeostasis in the body. And it does that by increasing your ATP production 3 to 5-fold. Now, ATP is the energy of life, and it's made and stored in the mitochondria, but it's used up so quickly, it sort of disappears as quickly as it's made. We actually need to make 70 to 80 kilograms of ATP every day.
Wow.
Which is amazing, yeah.
And what is ATP?
ATP is a biochemical, it's a chemical that gives energy to, it's a sort of unit of energy, if you like, in nature. And it's made and stored in the mitochondria. And we have 100,000 mitochondria in each cell. And they're busy converting ATP, which is then used up instantly, because we also have 100,000 biochemical processes occurring per second in each cell.
Wow.
And then you start to understand why we need 70 to 80 kilograms of it. But mitochondrial dysfunction is at the base of ME, CSF, long COVID, etc. And that's why people feel exhausted and they can't recover from exercise or doing anything. So this little device, you wear it for at least 3 hours a day, and it's on a cuff around your ankle or around your upper arm. I actually, my husband sleeps with it, and I wear it during the day while I'm sitting at my desk. And it promotes healing, which is amazing. And I've seen some incredible results with it. And I recommend it to all my patients, and they come back with, I feel more balanced, my aches and pains from my joints that I've had for 7 years have gone, incredible, wonderful successes. So I think that's a really good thing for everybody to have in their house, actually, because you never know when you're going to need it. It was very, very helpful. Is very helpful for the health of my 91-year-old father, who lives in Spain, and he's given me permission to say this, so people will have heard me perhaps talk about him and how this device helped his heart failure and improved his left ventricular function beyond what everyone expected just by drugs alone. It helped him to go through a hip replacement at the age of 90, which he was told he had a 1 in 3 chance of dying in the operation, and that he would be in ITU for 4 or 5 days. Well, he flew through the operation and was in ITU for less than 24 hours. Right. They actually didn't have his room ready for him because they were so taken by surprise at how healthy and fine and balanced his metabolism was and everything. And then we checked his PSA. He'd had an elevated PSA for 15 years, which is to sort of look at the prostate, and it's completely normal now.
Amazing.
So, yes, the urologist was gobsmacked. So I think it's fantastic. Anyway, so there's that. And then my other big quest is to find more and more treatments and supplements and things natural as possible, always, to help these patients with long COVID and with post-vaccine symptoms. And medicinal mushrooms are really up there now, absolutely amazing. And I'm having great success with promoting asking patients to have a look at those and think about using them. And the feedback we're getting back now is fantastic. And I take them myself, and I must say I feel much more that my body is more in homeostasis, it's more balanced, etc. I sleep better. I feel more cheerful. It's fantastic.
So this is
magic. They're just medicinal.
I was going to say, is it opposed to magic mushrooms? Yeah. But let's stick with the medicinal. But how do you get access to all of these things?
Well, so the ARC microcurrent device is arcmicrotech.com/ARC4health. And I would really recommend that. And then the company that we use, there are lots of companies out there making medicinal mushrooms, but the company that we recommend uses organic and is very pure preparations, is called Hephaestus, and that's hephaestus.com. And I'm currently taking Mycosol and Myco5. And when you look at their website, there's a lot of really useful information on there. And for medical professionals, if they want to register as a medical professional on the website, they get access to all the data and the research and the papers on that. So it's really worth doing a deep dive into that.
If you could, perhaps you could email it to me, and I'll put it on the on the blurb under the video. Sure. That'd be great. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing that we are all constantly researching and discussing with various scientists and doctors around the world is how to get rid of the spike protein from our bodies.
Right.
And that is, I think, going to be the single most important thing going forward that we all need to do. Okay. And it's not just from the vaccine. It's actually also from the COVID infection, which people keep catching again and again and again. So, do
you know anything about the shedding idea? Can people be picking up the spike protein from others?
Yes.
Right.
I think they can. I think there's a lot of evidence that they can. And one study showed that people shedding at least up to 18 weeks.
Right.
So, that's very concerning. So even those of us who choose not to have any more or have any will be shed upon by those who keep thinking that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And then, that brings us back to medical ethics, doesn't it? That no one has given fully informed consent.
No.
Nobody. And that's illegal.
Yes.
That's enshrined, fully informed consent is enshrined in UK law and international law, and it's been completely indefensibly ignored.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary. Hart did a really good statement. I don't know if you've seen it. The Hart 2024 statement on medical ethics, just ethics, which is brilliant. Mm-hmm. And they said, forced social isolation of citizens is always morally and ethically wrong. Forced medical procedures are always morally and ethically wrong. Psychological manipulation of the populations without their consent is always morally and ethically wrong. Government policies that trample on basic constitutional rights, e.g. the right to work, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, are always morally and ethically wrong. And government policies designed to increase fear amongst the population are always morally and ethically wrong. And all I can say to that is hear.
Yeah. I think as well that there are many things that are probably criminal as well. So because of my background, I looked into this and spoke to a lot of former colleagues. We did in fact put together a criminal case which was submitted to the police and just ignored. And I think that one of our problems is that we can find all of the evidence that we want to find. We can draw up the papers, but right now there isn't an agency that will take it on board.
You're absolutely right, Ian. You've hit the nail on the head. It's extraordinary that all the sort of principles that we lived by have just all been destroyed.
Yes.
So, for example, I was one of the doctors, I am one of the doctors in the CCVAG with Dr. Ross Maidment, or Dr. Ross Jones. She has two surnames. I never quite know which one to call her, but she's an amazing woman, a retired paediatrician. And I'll never forget the day I heard on the radio that they were going to start vaccinating children. I burst into tears. Because it was just so criminal and so wrong, so wrong. And she started gathering like-minded doctors together to sign her letters, and I've signed every single open letter. And we sent it to the MHRA, we sent it to the JCVI, and they just ignored them. And this is a new tactic, isn't it? If you just ignore people who are giving you evidence and presenting cases and know what they're talking about, it's incredibly frustrating.
It is.
And it also means you can't progress with anything, which just shows that everything is broken.
Yeah. I even personally turned up at the offices of the World Health Organization in Geneva with the joint letter from Hart and ourselves. And to be greeted with a very empty building, two security officers who were sitting about 10 metres apart with an empty room. And when I took the letter to them and said, I want this to be passed on, essentially to Tedros, I want him to see it, but at least get it to his PA. And they said, no, we can't take it.
What?
And I said, but I'm here with it, with the letter in my hand. I'd like you to take it, please. No, oh no, we can't take that. You're going to have to send it in by registered post.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, it is La La Land.
Yeah.
We are living in La La Land. And the more people, but I do think more and more people are realizing it.
Yeah, and the more stories like that get out. The same thing happened. My former police colleague went into a police station, presented the evidence to the officer on the desk, who then proceeded to chuck him out and turn the lights off and lock the doors.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's crazy.
Well, it just shows how these organisations and that are in place are actually corrupt, and therefore we just need alternatives, don't we? Yeah,
I think that's the only answer. Yeah, we've got to go somewhere else because we're not being served by the powers that be that are in place now. So we can't rely on the Crown Prosecution Service. We can't rely on the police. We can't rely on the court system generally. We can't rely on MHRA, JCVI, Gavi, you name it. It doesn't matter, any of them. And particularly the World Health Organization, which brings me on just quickly. I know that we're going to running out of time, but we now in May have this World Health Assembly where they're going to be essentially, I guess, ratifying this pandemic treaty and the IHR amendments. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that right now.
I think it's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And when I've written to my MP with all the arguments and saying we're going to give up our sovereignty, do you realise what they intend to do and what powers you will give them? And he comes back with this standard answer: no, we are always going to maintain our sovereignty and stuff like that. But which means he hasn't read it and he hasn't understood it, and that is incredibly frustrating. I think that though, Dr. Tess Lowry had a meeting with some lawyers on Monday. And they think therefore, if that's the case, then they're going to take that to court, although we know the courts are captured. But they're going to have to use what we can. We can,
and we've got to maintain hope, I think, and that eventually we find someone that says, actually, no, we can't turn this away.
And there are people like that, because there have been court cases in the States on various things where they have ruled in a common sense, moral, ethical way.
I think they're better off in the States because they have states, and the states are independent from the Fed, so therefore they can. They can set some of their own rules, and they can. So on state level, they can make big changes,
we need to decentralize everything. Having everything power centrally is completely wrong. You can't apply something globally to every community to every group of people all over the world living in different circumstances, different regions, different beliefs, different health. You can't do that. It needs to be, we need local communities, we need local healthcare, we need local decisions for local people, made by local people.
Absolutely.
And and we need to look after each other and sort of withdraw from this la land that is being portrayed as the only way to live, and it's not. And I think that more and more people are thinking in those terms, you know. I think Matt Letizier said that when he first started tweeting on social media and things, 95% of the comments were, "Don't be ridiculous, Matt, what are you talking about? You're spreading misinformation and all this." And he said now, 4 years later, 95% of the comments are, "Well done, Matt, thank you for speaking out.
Yeah.
Thank you for, you know, speaking the truth."
Yeah, and I think he's found a lot more of his colleagues and former colleagues now speaking out too. You know, they've realised what's been going on, and it makes a big difference.
I hope people realise, you know, safety in numbers. If everybody started speaking out, then we would, you know, we can do this.
This is it. It's that fear factor, isn't it? It was so annoying that doctors wouldn't speak out, nurses wouldn't speak out. I had a long conversation with one of the nurses that was looking after me a few months ago about masking when the mask was still prevalent. And I knew that she agreed, but she couldn't bring herself to say, "You know what, Ian, I agree with you, but you could just tell just by the reaction, you know."
Yeah, I think we do our children a disservice when we teach them to be completely obedient. You know, I mean, I did that to my kids. You know?
Yeah.
My parents did it to me. They taught me to be very obedient, and I think, you know, fair enough. You want children to be well behaved, but you also want them to be critically thinking. Yeah. And I would and I don't think they teach that in schools. I would be teaching children to think critically in schools. At university especially, there should be lots of debate. There should be lots of, you know, different opinions. It's okay to have a different opinion. You don't have to agree with everybody. Everyone doesn't have to agree with you. You don't have to take it personally. And it's just so important to speak the truth.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I was invited onto GB News at the beginning of last year, so I went on with Nigel Farage on the 3rd of January, I think it was, and I was told like 2 hours before, "Would you go on? He wants to speak to somebody about masks." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I suddenly thought, well, it's an opportunity, isn't it, to just tell the truth. That's all I have to do. I don't need to be worried or frightened about it. I just need to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what we were going to fully discuss, but I thought I have to tell the truth. And it was an opportunity to actually say masks don't work and blah, blah, blah. You know, PCR test isn't COVID specific and there is treatment for COVID. And anyway, so we had 10 minutes of that, and that was the beginning. And then at the end of February, I was invited to Lawrence Fox's show, and I had a few more days' notice. So I said, we had 15 minutes together, and I said, "Lawrence, this is what I would be happy to discuss," because I didn't want to sort of find myself, you know, saying something that I couldn't substantiate, you know. And so I thought, well, I'll talk about things that are in the public domain and people can look at them and check that what I'm saying is true. So I said I was happy to discuss the MHRA public assessment report for the temporary authorization of the BioNTech vaccinations. And I pointed out that pages 16 to 21 show that there was no safety data, absolutely none whatsoever. And then we talked also about the European 6-monthly reports that are done by Pfizer and what they show, and it's not good. It's not good. And you know, the effects on fertility, really worrying. The biodistribution around the body, 16% going to the ovaries. And the all of that.
But of course, you said all that to Lawrence, and then I understand there was quite a kickback against him for that.
I think there probably was, but you know, it's sort of I said it from my heart, and it was true.
Yeah, no, I was saying, you told the truth, but it just goes to show where the governing bodies sit on this.
Yeah. He was always going to get into trouble for that.
Yeah, I mean...
He was being very brave. He was being very brave.
Yeah.
And the people put recordings of it onto Twitter, and one of them I saw had 10.6 million views, and another one had 6.4 million views. That was when I looked then, which was ages ago, and then it was translated into Spanish and translated into German, and it has since got me into trouble. But you know what, Ian, if somebody seeing it somewhere, a pregnant woman saw it and it stopped her getting the jab, then it will have been worth it.
Right. Yeah.
If one person was saved, it would have been worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you've been very brave, and you've been very brave and very honest, and you've told it how it is, and I know I'm eternally grateful, and everyone that knows you is, and it's wonderful, and very.
I have no choice. No choice. You have to do this. You have to be honest and open.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know you've got patients coming, and so you need a little bit of break, I think, to prepare. So I'm ever so grateful for you coming on. I don't know if there's anything else you just wanted to add at the end, but if not, then happy
there is
to
one
wrap
thing
up.
Actually.
Oh, go on then. Okay, tell me.
There is one thing, if I may. Yes, getting rid of the spike protein is going to be the most important thing for everybody, whether they've got long COVID or had vaccines or not had vaccines. I've had COVID. And please watch this space, because things are being developed to clear the spike protein from the body. And one is the augmented NAC, which has been specially, it's ordinary NAC that's been specially treated to make it more powerful for denaturing the spike protein. So that can be seen. There's a lot of information on zerospike.org/EN about that. But there's also Medicinals9. Medicinals.com are developing nasal sprays and other little nutraceutical medications that will also help clear the spike protein. And I am trialing a nasal spray that will clear it from your brain. So I'm very hopeful about that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. We
will definitely watch that space, and perhaps we can get together again when there's more information on it, and we'll keep pushing it.
I'd be delighted to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Tina, thanks ever so much. I'm ever so grateful for your time. It's been great, and we'll catch each other very soon. Take care.
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
Lovely to meet you again.
Thank you.